Okay, so we're going to talk about someone that many of you may not know. Well, you should all know him. But drummers most certainly know this guy. Drummers worship this guy. There are people who are well-known drummers who have been saying for decades that Tony Williams, we never called him Anthony or Anthony Tillman. You got time for that in jazz, but you're busy trying to get to the music. They just called him Tony. And most people did not call him Tony Williams. Tony was enough. If you were talking music, if you were talking drums, if you said Tony, everybody knew who that was. There was only one Tony out there, baby, and that was Tony Williams. Now, who is this guy? Well, he says as a little kid, he would go out and buy every record he could find by Max Roach, who is pretty much pioneer, father of modern drumming, or one of them. He said, and he would learn every solo and every note on the record he played. He would play right along with the record, and he would learn every stroke that Mike Roach played on every record. And then he'd do the same thing for Art Blakey. He do the same thing for every single Roy Haynes, every single jazz drummer he could find. Now, his father was a sax player, and he played gigs. Tony had been born in Chicago, but very early they moved to Detroit. And Dad played the saxophone and went to clubs all the time. And he took his little son, his namesake, Anthony Tillman Williams Jr., with him. So this kid was immersed in the jazz world from the time he could walk. And he's listening. And he got some interest in these drums. Although his dad's a sax player, so his dad hooked him up with some drums and all this. And then he did the next best thing. He found the great Alan Dawson, master musician and educator, who was at that time teaching at the Berklee School of Music in charge of jazz percussion. Alan had an accident which left him unable to travel, so he taught from his home. And he taught little Tony. At the age of 9, little Tony couldn't stand himself. One night in the club, after they said his dad came back to sit with him, he said, "Dad, I want to play." "What?" "Son, you're 9 years old. You Dad, I'm ready. I want to play." So at 9 years of age, this little brat walking on the stage with these grown men, and they all laughing, and some of them not laughing because they don't want to hear no 9-year-old kid trying to drive no jazz band. And little 9-year-old Tony gets up there, and before you know it, everybody's laughing and having a good time because Tony is playing his butt off. And people go, "Uh-oh, what have we here?" You know, the word got around. And by the time he was 13, the great Sam Rivers, who lived in the area at that time, Sam actually moved to Florida for the last 20 years of his life and played internationally, but lived actually in Orlando. Sam said, no, I'm hiring this kid right now. And he stayed with Sam for 2 years, 13, 14, 15. What? Yeah. Playing with Sam. Wow. And then, at 16, Jackie McLean came to town and went, I'm taking this cat to New York with me. But he's only 16. I don't care how old he is. I know he sounds like he's 115. So I'm taking him to New York with me. So off they go to New York. Jackie McLean and this little 16-year-old kid. Jackie knew what he had. As soon as they started setting up and playing in New York, everybody came. Who in the heck is this little drummer? And sitting in a corner in darkness is who we call the darkness of jazz. Mr. Miles Davis, with his dark glasses, his hat pulled low. And he's checking the scene. Oh, yes, he is. And he said, yeah, I got to get that boy. Jackie can't pay him what I can pay him. And at 17, Tony Williams becomes the drummer in Miles Davis's second great quintet. We're talking about he is playing with Wayne Shorter, Herbie Hancock, Ron Carter, and Miles Davis. Wow, this is legendary. And when Miles was asked about 17-year-old Tony Williams, he says, he is redefining what a jazz rhythm section is. He is the secret to the core of this new band. Everything that we are able to do is because of Tony Williams. Now, for you techno heads out there, I'm talking about who understand drum technique, musical content and whatnot, the thing that Tony could do is he could play polyrhythms. He could take a rhythm from this meter and a rhythm from this meter, a rhythm from this meter, and play them all at the same time and with the same tempo, and have one rhythm in this hand, one rhythm in this hand, another rhythm on the foot, another rhythm on the foot, and never get confused. And people will go crazy just listening to it, let alone watching this little kid do that stuff. And then, just to make it more interesting, he would do what we call metric modulation. We all think 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's the whole American thing. Not Tony. He'd go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. Yeah, he would take a half beat out of that and give it to the next measure. So he was doing what we call metric modulation. With all that other stuff going on, he would sometimes just steal half a beat from this rhythm while keeping the other rhythm strictly in 4/4. That's mind-boggling mathematics, let alone coordination and discipline and all of that. And he's 17 years old. Unfortunately, 1970, rock and roll. The greatest band Miles Davis ever had. He's not getting much traction because everybody is looking at the electronics thing. So Miles took what we call a 6-year vacation. He went to his basement, and let's just say he medicated himself every day, and that's what he did for 6 years. And that was the end of that band. But Tony Williams, 17. He ain't done. Well, what does he do? He starts another band. What kind of band? A fusion band, the very same thing that caused Miles Davis to shut his band down. When Tony was a young kid, he had signed with Blue Note Records and made an album called Life-Time. That was his very first album. And he finally made this album, started this fusion group, and it was called the Tony Williams Lifetime, after the fact that this was his first album. It was a pretty wild group. It started out with Tony Williams and the great John McLaughlin, who would go on to record with Miles Davis, and also would start the group that we know as the Mahavishnu Orchestra, or Mahavishnu. It's according to how you want to say it. And the great Larry Young, who was instrumental in the album Unity, that featured someone who I'll be covering soon, Mr. Woody Shaw and Elvin Jones. But back to Tony. Tony had this group, and it was doing really well. But Tony is young, and he got a lot he wants to do. And no one can figure why Tony is doing all these things, man. He's just so busy. And someone decided they had missed Miles Davis and his acoustic group. So they tried to convince Miles to come back and do that group again. And Miles refused. I'm on vacation, I ain't gonna do it. A lot of people say Miles is just too lazy to practice by this time. I'm not gonna say that. I guess I already said it. Okay, whatever. Miles wouldn't do it. So, Tony Williams and Herbie Hancock and Ron Carter and Wayne Shorter convinced Freddie Hubbard to replace Miles in this group. And it was called VSOP. Very special one-time performance. That was it. They made one recording, they had one performance, and trust me, I think I have that on vinyl. I never know, because when I wasn't looking or when I was traveling, my sons, when they were in college, would, how shall I say this, would borrow some of my vinyl for their jazz research. Since they're both jazz musicians, a lot of what they borrowed, they never told me, and I never saw again. So I assume I still have VSOP. But it is a groundbreaking album. And to be honest, nobody misses Miles, because Freddie was playing so much trumpet at that time. And then what? Back into fusion. And this time he has a second lifetime. But he wants to make it more edgy. So he makes it a four-piece group. McLaughlin, Larry Young, Tony Williams, and he wanted to make it have a real rock and roll kind of thing. So he hired a singer and a bass player that most people know, or don't know they know. It's a guy named Jack Bruce. Some of you will get it. Oh, Jack Bruce, are you kidding me? Yeah, Jack Bruce played with Tony Williams. He played jazz. Who is Jack Bruce? He was the bass player for a 60s rock group known as Cream, that also included a power trio. Eric Clapton on guitar and Ginger Baker, who was also a very good jazz drummer, believe it or not. So Jack Bruce joins this project, and he also sings on the album as well, since he was also the singer for the rock group Cream. Bet you didn't know that one, did you? Yeah. So that lasted for a while, and then he started another fusion group. Didn't last very long, but then there was some politics in this country. Involving Cuba, somewhere around the late 70s. I think it's 76 or so. And three musicians decided to make a statement. So they broke the law. They formed a group. Tony Williams, Jaco Pastorius, and John McLaughlin. And they went down to Cuba and played at the Havana Jazz Festival and recorded it to make sure everybody knew they did it. Now, they could have been, a whole lot of trouble. But the music on this album was so killing, and it was so popular that, let's just say, the government decided to look the other way. So Tony also had a commitment to doing the right thing and standing up for the common man, as he did in that project with Jaco. I guess the VSOP affected him. He was known to be a powerful drummer. They say he could play as loud as any rock drummer, but with the finesse that was uncanny. So what does he do? He starts another acoustic group. So here's a guy that can play electronics, acoustic, straight ahead, fusion, rock. He can play. So this crew had the great Wallace Roney, who actually played the part of Miles Davis on a live recording that was done about 20 years ago by Quincy Jones. And there were some things that Miles, let's just say, wasn't able to get to. So they brought in Wallace Roney, because Wallace Roney could sound exactly like Miles. And for most people, they didn't realize that there was a second trumpet player who was doing some of the work that Miles should have been doing. Wallace Roney was in this band. A guy named Billy Pierce on tenor sax, who became the tenor sax instructor at the Berklee School of Music. I think Billy finally retired last year. The great Mulgrew Miller on piano. I think he died 2 years ago, Mulgrew. And Ira Coleman, a black Belgian on bass, who was steeped in classical bass but also played jazz. He was on bass. And yeah, that was a whole band. And I know it must have been around 1990. I went to Orlando to see them with my younger son, because my older son, the drummer, was at college and couldn't get there. He's still angry at me for not making him come to Orlando to see Tony Williams live, because he never got a chance to see Tony, and Tony was his favorite drummer. But I went to Orlando to see Tony Williams, and it was almost like, I don't know, it was almost like going to church. All the drummers that were there to worship Tony Williams. And before Tony hit the stage, the opening group played. An 18-year-old Christian McBride was playing bass. I remember turning to my son, who's a bass player, and he was 18 as well. And I told him, I said, man, look, here's the deal. I said, if you're sure you want to be a bass player, I need to tell you something right now. You see that kid up on stage? He's your age, he's 18. Listen to him. I said, as long as you live, he's going to be in your face. So if you don't want to play like that, you need to just stop right now, because he's going to control the bass for the next 50 years. And Christian McBride had been rated the best bass player on the planet for the last 30 years. So I just have an ear for things like that. Every drummer I knew from Pinellas County was in Orlando, and they were all standing in front of the stage, and Tony decided to give them a drum lesson. So he walks out on stage, he sits down at his yellow drum set. That was his signature. He'd been playing since he was a kid. Little kids like bright colors. His first drum set was yellow, and from that point on, every drum set he owned was yellow. He walks out there and he starts out with a simple open roll. But it was an open roll like none other. No one had ever heard one that fast, and no one had ever heard one that clean. And we were all listening to this incredible demonstration of technique and perfection. And in the middle of it, he starts talking to him. He's like, yeah, I practice. He's just stroking. I practice. You will never be like me, because you're not going to practice like I practice. He said, I wouldn't be here looking at me if I were you. I'd be on practicing so you can play like this. And then the band hit and the place exploded, and that was it. Tony Williams. Shortly after that, he decided to give up New York. New York was getting ugly, and he wanted something different. So he moved to the Bay Area, San Francisco. He started teaching privately and in some little schools. He played, but pretty much he was chilled out. He had done just about everything that could be done. He had traveled the world. He had recorded 27 albums of his own. He recorded 7 collaborations. He had recorded about 30 albums as a member of a group, and he recorded 51 albums as a sideman. In 1997, Tony Williams had some issues with his stomach, and he went and checked himself into the hospital for a very simple gallbladder operation, and died on the table of a heart attack. It was shock. I don't know any jazz musician that does not tell you what they were doing when they got the news that Tony Williams had passed away. He was only 51 years old when he died. And I think that may be why he was always so busy and so highly motivated. I look at all of these great persons. Jimi Hendrix, he lasted 26 years. The great Charlie Christian, the first electric guitar player in jazz, he only lived 21 years. So there are some people who walk among us, but not for long. They come to this plane of existence with a purpose, with a mission. They do incredible things that sometimes go unrecognized until after they're long gone. And then they quietly pass away and move to the next plane of existence. I believe Tony Williams came here to redefine this music we call jazz, and certainly to redefine the art of jazz drumming. Anthony Tillman Williams, Jr., 1945 to 1997, and still living in the hearts, minds, and ears of millions. Thank you very much.